They strike in schools, movie theaters, and houses of worship across the globe, including right here on American soil. President Obama has said that lone wolf terrorist attacks in America are now more likely to happen than the coordinated terrorism attacks that occurred on 9/11. Hello, I'm Kathy Lair, and on this edition of Focus, we'll explore seemingly unrelated acts of terrorism. What do they have in common? And how is our government working to track down the lone wolves and stop them from carrying out their diabolical plans? Our special guest today is Ed Bridgman, Associate Professor in the Criminal Justice Department at the University of Cincinnati, Claremont. He is also a terrorism expert. Thank you so much for being with us, Ed.
Thank you.
How worried should we be about the threat of a terrorist attack in America as we sit here today?
Very. I think we're overdue. I believe that most of the coordinated terrorists are, as opposed to the uncoordinated, unorganized ones, are kind of holding off for the election till that gets passed, so they don't look like they're coming down on one side or the other. But we're overdue for some significant terrorist incidents here in America.
In the aftermath of the terrorist attacks on America in 2001, we were so hypervigilant. We were watching our neighbors' houses. We were watching for any suspicious trucks going up and down the road. I would guess that we've really relaxed that stance.
Unfortunately, we have. We've started taking the lack of significant terrorist attacks, like the 9/11 type attack, for granted that things are peaceful now, and we're not looking at the little individual pinpricks that are coming at us. Many years ago, the Russians, when they were putting together their revolution, suggested that the best way to go after the Tsarist government was like the old Russian bear baiting, where you set a pack of dogs on the bear, and the dogs bark at the bear and he turns to them, and then the other dogs come and bite the bear from behind. And when he turns to that, then these dogs turn and bite the bear. And the bear doesn't die from a massive trauma, but eventually the bear slows down because of the loss of blood from all these little attacks and suffers weakness, and then the whole pack of dogs take advantage of that weakness. And the terrorists, just because they are different than we are, think differently than we do, doesn't mean they're stupid, and we know for a fact that they've read these same books.
And I'm wondering, is the greater threat in this country today, is it an organized group like an Al-Qaeda, or are we talking more about those lone wolves, those isolated cells?
Absolutely, they're a greater threat. Al-Qaeda, as we knew it in 2001, no longer exists. It's not the big corporate entity that it was, that had the functionality and the planning and the resources. It's now more like a franchising outfit, where they're sending out their ideas and their ideals, their philosophy, their methods, their means of attack. A good example, the 2005 attacks on the London subway. These were people who were Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda 1.0. You know, they weren't the original Al-Qaeda, or pardon me, 2.0. And these individuals went on the internet. They believed in Al-Qaeda. They believed in the philosophy of Al-Qaeda. Went on the internet and got ideas, got formulas for their explosives, and two separate groups operating independently within 2 weeks attacked the London subway system. And both attacks were a complete surprise to the officials because we had become accustomed to dealing with the Al-Qaeda type groups, the big, huge entities, the same way we dealt with the Soviet Union during the Cold War era, on a highly technological basis. where we could monitor their chatter, monitor their finances, all of those things that gave us indications of at least directionality, if not explicit targeting. It gave us ideas the way they're headed. These small, independent phantom cells that are operating out there outside of any command structure are completely devoid of that electronic footprint that we had with Al-Qaeda in either their chatter or in their financial doings. We had some people here in the United States that, in order to get their explosives together, sold some stereo parts. So this is not high-end kind of stuff, and it makes it really, really difficult to monitor. At the same time, they have the capability of delivering very, very serious blows.
And you wonder how. Because we have the Office of Homeland Security, we have the FBI, we have all this know-how that, and especially in the aftermath of what happened in 2001, you would think that would be able to stop it. But then again, it's freedom of speech. They can say whatever they want, right?
Right. Well, within reason, but, there are
in
reasons.
a lot of cases, unless
Yes.
they actually do something,
Unless they're
prove
doing
to
something,
do something.
they have to have something that's indicative of moving toward a violent terroristic type act, and all of these individuals, these phantom cells, these lone wolf individuals that we have interdicted here in the United States, we've gotten because they don't have the home office to call and say, where do we get explosives? So they go to a bar and kind of hint around, and the word gets around that somebody's looking for explosives. The FBI puts an informant or an undercover agent in there and offers to sell them, offers to teach them the stuff, and determines whether they are indicating they really want to do something, or if they're just having diarrhea of the mouth. And then once they move to the point, like the case down in Texas, they actually gave the prospective terrorist a remote detonator, and when he pushed the button, it set a buzzer off, and then that was the indication to the FBI that he really would have set the explosions off, and they arrested him. So that's how we're catching up with these people these days.
Let's dig a little bit deeper. When you say a lone wolf terrorist, what exactly are we talking about? Who are we talking about?
We're talking about individuals or small groups. When we say lone wolf, it might be a wolf pack. But these are individuals who operate independent of any command structure. They have already developed the ideologue, the devotion to whatever cause or figurehead we're talking about here, but they're not reporting to a command structure. This is a term that actually came out of the 1970s and 80s when the groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Klan Watch people, the FBI, the Justice Department were doing such a tremendously effective job of breaking up the Klan in the United States. And one of the leaders of the Klan, down in Texas, a chap by the name of Louis Beam, said, what we need to do is break up into cells. We need to just deal with people we know so we don't have informants in the group and everything like that. He called it leaderless resistance, where you have the ideal. I mean, we don't have to tell you what the philosophy of the group is. You already know that, or you wouldn't be involved with the group. But it's up to you to decide what to do with that. It's up to you to decide what your targeting parameters are going to be, how many other people you're going to involve in this, when you're going to do this. completely independent of any direction or command from above. Plausible deniability by the leaders. You know, we deplore that kind of thing, but we didn't have any idea they were going to do it. This again is something that has been picked up by a number of other groups. A lot of the ecology groups, the animal liberation groups, the anti-abortion groups have jumped on this. And of course, in the last 7 or 8 years, after we have pretty well effectively wiped out Al-Qaeda as the home office for these groups, a lot of the radical fundamentalist Islamic militants have jumped on this same bandwagon of operating independently.
It would almost seem that the word hatred is the one word that just unites all these groups together.
Right. That's the basis of the philosophy, whether you hate Israel or hate the United States for supporting Israel, or you hate the United States for affording rights to minority groups that you don't appear to like or approve of. Hate is probably the biggest motivator for these people. The displeasure at the way society is treating them, their group, and that even goes to the emotionally disturbed individuals, such as the Colorado theater shooter. No political ideology involved in that, but he was feeling oppressed, repressed, suppressed, or something.
And this is a very bright individual. We're talking about a student who was a doctoral student.
Well, there's a lot of controversy now about exactly how bright he was, that he was an exceedingly big frog in a relatively small pond. He was used to being the brightest guy in the room, and when he moved to a room full of very bright people, he didn't shine nearly as well, and he grew to resent that, and to resent the fact that he was no longer the fair-haired boy in the room, and that hatred, that self-hatred, grew and into twisted ways.
You know, we talk about hatred being the one thing that tends to link all these groups. If you look at the Southern Poverty Law Center report that came out that said that hate groups have increased 65% in the past 10 years. 65%.
Absolutely.
What does that mean about the possibility of how many potential terrorists could be out there?
Well, all of them, to some extent, are terroristic, or they wouldn't be hooked up with these hate groups, unless you really throw your loop out to hate groups. But the Southern Poverty Law Center is very good about defining intentionality, and these are groups that have an intention to act out on it. They're not just exercising their freedom of speech and talking about who they like or dislike or what they would do. They're actually doing something about it. A lot of the border ranger groups down along the southern border that are actively going out after illegal alien border crossers. This indicates that they are not just opposed to open borders, that they're doing something about it that's outside of conventional law enforcement. So a number of these groups, some of the old Posse Comitatus groups that just started out as being opposed to income tax, have gotten very, very activist in going after welfare individuals, and so on down the line, one group after another. And then we have on the other side of this, I mentioned the Islamic militant fundamentalists, yes, that so dislike America. And a lot of them are here, but you hear them talking about, Britney Spears and Coca-Cola and all the bad things that they see here in America understand that they hate us because so much of what we stand for is diametrically opposed to what they stand for. We're seeing this all through the Arab world now. They don't understand freedom of speech. They don't understand freedom of religion. They don't understand women's rights and a lot of other things. And so their hatred for us is at a very, very deep-seated philosophical level. It's not something that's going to be cured by handing out coloring books saying how good we are, or buying airtime on their radio stations and saying, this is the way we are, guys. They're going to continue to hate us.
Why do these individuals say that they do what they do? Is there like one reason?
Most of them that are talking about it.
Because we're talking innocent
Sure.
children, families that are killed, not.
Most of them express it in terms of a last resort. We've tried to reason with America, and we've tried to change our government, the right-wing paramilitaries will say, but we have not been able to do that. So our adversaries have compelled us to do these terrible things. We wouldn't want to do this, but you've compelled us to do it because you've left us with no choice. And even when you get down to the fellows like Buford that shot up a daycare center, when pinned down about this, and you read their writings, there's a desperation there, that they feel that they're the last clarion that's giving this call, that nobody's listening, so they are compelled to do something terrible.
And a lot of these individuals probably don't think, from what you're saying, they're going to walk away from this.
No, a lot of them don't. And in some of the more militant fundamentalists on all sides consider it almost bad form if they live through it. They expect that their martyrdom, their death is going to be a part, whether it's God or Allah or Marx or whatever. They feel that somehow this is going to raise them up. And that's what many of these people who get involved in this are inadequate personalities. They have spent their lives looking for something bigger to do, something bigger to associate with. And they view this as a way to not just bring glory to their cause, but to finally go out gloriously.
Are there warning signs that these individuals generally exhibit before they do some of these types of activities?
Yeah, there's all kinds of things you can look for in their intentionality. And one of the mistakes that we have made with these smaller groups is not believing them. If they say, I'm going to do something to destroy American civilization, we should look very carefully at them and what they intend to do to follow through with that. So that's one of the first warning signs. Very few of these people are quiet about what they want to do. Very few of them are quietly passionate about their cause. They're saying things. They're involved with like-minded individuals. Just because we say lone wolf doesn't mean they're all alone. Very often they will seek out like-minded individuals to act as sounding boards, to reinforce how they feel. So, we should be aware of that sort of thing. It's like the school shooters a few years ago. Every last case in the school shooters, before they did anything, they told people that they were going to do it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes very explicitly. They shared it with friends what they were going to do.
It's just so bizarre that you wouldn't believe that somebody you know could do something like that.
Well, that's it. We didn't believe them. We didn't believe that they would do something that that strange, that bizarre, that off the beaten path. That's what I said. We have to believe them. The other thing we watch for is these amateurs that have to get their material together and don't know exactly what they're doing. The Times Square bomber had all the instructions. I mean, he'd gone overseas and learned how to do this, had the instructions that said you use the fertilizer for the bomb and that sort of thing. But when he went to buy his fertilizer, the fertilizer he bought was organic. It wasn't the ammonium nitrate fertilizer. So all he got was a really good fire in his van, which was good because it would have been, but watching the amateurs, watching for amateurish things like that, watching for someone who doesn't know how to build a bomb, looking for somebody who can teach them how to build a bomb. That's how so many of these people have been caught up.
We hear a lot about preparedness and the importance of that to perhaps stopping some of these things from moving forward. Talk to us about where we are in the Cincinnati area as we sit here today. How well are we prepared?
I would say we're years ahead of most other places. If you take out the New York, which is absolutely, that's the Mercedes-Benz, Cadillac level. You take those folks out. You take out Washington because of the being the seat of government. Maybe Los Angeles, a couple other places. We are extremely well ahead of other places. One of the advantages we have a tradition in this part of the country of police and fire cooperating. Mm-hmm. That's not true every place. Mm-hmm. That is not true. We've had since the 1920s the Hamilton County Police Association, where we have cooperative narcotics, investigative, SWAT, all kinds of cooperative things that just don't exist in other parts of the country. So we were ahead of the curve that way. We also have understanding on the part of the political officials here in this whole general area, not just Hamilton County, but all certainly Claremont, where I'm involved with several things, Butler County, Warren County. The political side of the House recognizes that things need to be done, that cooperations need to take place, that these are not things that you can put together at the scene. You have to work it ahead of time. And we have all been given the slack to put those things together ahead of time. Police, fire, emergency medical, emergency management folks. We also have a population who, even though it's not like the right after 9/11 when everybody was watching everybody and what they were carrying and things like that, we still have a population who is, for the most part, cooperative with law enforcement, with emergency management, and are willing to say, that doesn't look right, and report it to us. The Terrorism Early Warning Group, the Fusion Center, have almost more than they can handle with information that's coming in from the general population, which is good, which is good. So I'd give us a really solid B+ on that, and that's only because we still have room for improvement.
Your best advice to a citizen watching this program, see something that's a little out of the ordinary in the neighborhood?
Report it. Report it. This dealing with terrorists and terrorism is not some spooky, esoteric. You don't have to have ninja training and be a former Marine recon and all of that. It's neighborhood watch writ large. That's all it is.
Thank you so much for being with us, Ed.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
For more information about the Homeland Security services that are available locally, please visit Hamilton County Emergency Management Agency's website at hamiltoncounty.ohioema.org. You may also call them at 263-8200. To watch this and other Focus episodes again on demand, you can do so at our website, cetconnect.org/focus. Thank you for watching. I'm Kathy Allaire, and we'll see you next time right here on Focus.
Tell us what you think about the programs we air, or let us know if you would like to see a particular topic on Focus. There are several ways you can contact us. You can send your comments by email to focus@cetconnect.org. You can call us at 513-345-6522. Or you can write to us at Focus, care of Andrew Dahman, 1223 Central Parkway, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45214. Any use or rebroadcast of this copyrighted program or portions thereof is prohibited without the expressed written approval of CET.